Okay, Professor. This is continuing on from where we left off with the previous interview. And so you talked about the time when you woke up.
Yeah, when I woke up. Yeah,
Yes.
That was a very significant time for me.
Which year was this?
This would have been 1977. So that's 33 years ago today. And just to be clear, it wasn't that there was one moment. I'd say several weeks before this particular weekend that I'll be talking about, there were some changes happening in my life. I felt like I was opening in different ways. And in particular, I heard about these Chautauqua, this Chautauqua series of talks. It was a whole system they had, over 100 years ago, where people would come and discuss some subject in a community in a way that was open to everybody. And so I said, we ought to do that in my professional field, decision analysis. So we organized one where people could bring anyone, their girlfriends, their husbands, anybody who wanted to come. And it was very successful because it was just a big conversation, not a lecture in some sense, although people did make statements. So that was the beginning, saying this is pretty good. And so I started looking into this further. How could we expand? And at the time, my son David was reading a book called For a New Liberty, and he got into this quite a while ago about great interest in freedom and lack of coercion. And so I started reading this book over that several 2 or 3 week period. And what I realized was that some of the things that I had thought were true, I really questioned. And I'd studied economics as an undergraduate. As a matter of fact, I got a degree in economics as well as electrical engineering from MIT, because you could get 2 for the price of 1 by taking extra exams and so forth. And I thought that was pretty good, but I didn't seem to be working in my life. So I noticed in this book, one of the things they talked about, this For a New Liberty book, was the minimum wage. And I got to thinking about that. And the question is, if the minimum wage is a good idea, then why don't we make it really an attractive wage, like $100 an hour? In other words, how would you decide what the minimum wage should be? And you realize that if you make the minimum wage $100 an hour, then a lot of people are going to be out of work. In other words, as the book pointed out, having a high minimum wage is just a way of making sure that people are unemployed at a higher wage rate, if you think about it. So this made a lot of sense to me. And I remember as sort of a week before I was making, I and my colleagues, Jim Matheson and the graduate students, were making a trip to Washington. That was the time when I still did consulting associated with government things. And in preparation for this, I was going to the airport and reading this book, and I remember having all these thoughts on the way to the airport about, why don't we do things differently, or why do we do it what we're doing now if it doesn't make sense? And what happened was, during this 3 or so day trip to Washington, I had continual experiences that showed the difference between what we were attempting to do, and I'll tell you about that in a moment, and what this book was pointing out to me and the thinking I've been doing. So this whole episode was about a time when Jimmy Carter was president, and he decided to ban nuclear reprocessing because of fear that somehow dangerous materials would get into the hands of the wrong people. And so he put this ban in, and this had a direct effect on a plant that about 3 large companies, I think it was, had built in South Carolina, Barnwell, South Carolina, to do reprocessing. And so Congress was quite some elements of Congress were quite upset about this, in particular a senator from South Carolina who got a bill passed that said that before this could be done, there had to be a study, an official study of whether this, what were the implications of this. And as part of that study, we got a contract at the Decision Analysis Group of SRI International to assist in this study. There were other people, other organizations involved too. I remember we'd meet at this giant conference room at the National Science Foundation, and it looked like there were 60 people around the table from all kinds of places. So we got into this, and one of the things we had done previously was to visit this site in South Carolina, which was extremely impressive, a huge investment. It had all kinds of remote equipment because you had to take the nuclear fuel rods and chop them up and dissolve them in acid and separate the components. They had a giant pool to keep the control rods in. It was the size of several Olympic swimming pools. And there was corridor after corridor of essentially cement structures covered with like 3/4 of an inch of stainless steels. You could just see the money that had been spent on this. And of course the whole purpose was that you would get another source of energy by taking the spent fuel from nuclear reactors and separating out plutonium and other things, and then you could use them again. That was the notion. Anyway, after some of the study that we had done, and including this impressive site visit, now it was time to go to Washington to spend a few days there with meetings. And that was a very interesting process because I remember some of the meetings were almost, what could I say, almost like some kind of strange comedy. We were at one point sitting in, I think it was the State Department, waiting for an appointment. And remember, I have all these ideas going on in my head. And I'm talking with Jim and Dan Owen, the student who's working on it, the former student who's working on it. And it was just like I'm living two different worlds. One, this world that I knew could exist based on the reading, and the other one was the one that I was actually participating in. And so in the Department of State, we're waiting to have a meeting, and there are magazines to read. And so I'm looking at these. And what are the magazines? They're catalogs of weapons. In other words, the advertisements like my anti-aircraft gun fires, this many, and no, mine is, here's my tank. It was unbelievable. I mean, this was the place where you could shop for weapons, and we know, we know about the nations in the world right now and the huge amount of arms that are sold by all kinds of countries and bought by others. And I thought, this is really amazing. Here we have this part of the government where you can go and look into everything you want to know about weapons. And it was not the military part, it was the Department of State. So that was pretty much of a shock. Then I remember a meeting we had with someone in the executive, I won't mention all the names of the people because I've probably forgotten them. But we had a meeting in the old executive office building, which is where a lot of high-level functionaries are. And we had this discussion about what we were studying, and we got a comment from this person. He said, well, I don't think we should talk about that and so forth, and maybe we shouldn't do this study. And I said, yes, but Congress has required that this study be done. And his statement was, of course he worked for the administration, we don't give a damn what Congress wants, we're going to do this. And I thought that was kind of interesting, not what I learned in my civic texts and so forth. So the ideas that we learned was this was some kind of charade that we were going to participate in to look as if a study had been done when it wasn't being done. And that was the experience of this study, because we doing a decision analysis pretty clearly found that what you ought to do with this plant depended on the chance that you might ever want to use it again. In other words, If you're sure you wouldn't, well, you might as well use it for scrap. If you're sure you would, of course, you wouldn't touch it at all. And if there was some chance of that, you might put it in some kind of mothballs just in case. Because after all, the presidential declarations don't last any longer than the president's term in office. And this plant presumably could be used for decades, and another administration might want to use it. So we did an analysis where we had a probability that it would be used again. And how would you change your strategy with different probability? It looked like some of the problems we do in class, they're pretty simple. And then we sent this out, and then it was reviewed on high, and it said, well, wait a second, you can't do this. You can't have this probability it might be used again. Well, why not? Well, that's against the presidential policy. You can't have anything in a document that's against presidential policy. Oh. So we can't even suggest that it might be used again. Well, you certainly can't have this probability. Well, so we tried all kinds of ways around it. We called it a parameter or something. Now, that didn't work either. And we kept getting everything that made sense edited out of this report until, in spite of the substantial amount spent on this contract, not one comma of our contribution appeared in the report. Now think about that. It wasn't because there was something wrong with it. It wasn't politically acceptable for this purpose by the administration, even though Congress had said such a report had to be done and we had been hired to participate in it. Well, that was one of the beginnings of my further concern about, is this whole system working if things like this are happening? So during this 3-day session, we had that discussion about, what does Congress want? I remember we had sessions in the dome of the Capitol, right up there where it starts curving over. Some of the offices up there have curved sides because you're right up there. So we were in the heart of the government, the State Department, atomic energy, all that kind of thing. And so I got my nose rubbed in government for 3 days while I was having these thoughts about, is this whole thing a good idea? And I think that had a big effect on what was going to happen to me later. Anyway, coming home, I forget Wednesday or Thursday night, I just had this huge contradiction in my mind. How can this be? And that's one of the reasons why I then decided never to participate in government projects again. But on Thursday, it was regular. I was back. It was from Wednesday. Thursday was a regular school day. And it was a very interesting day for me. First of all, I had read Persig's book on Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and had made some very good points to me, including one that came to the fore, which was it said you can't be both a judge and a coach. And he said that therefore you really couldn't grade students. If you're going to be their coach, you shouldn't grade them. If you're going to grade them, you got to be a judge. And I said, well, I know what I want to do. I want to be a coach and not a judge. And so I marched into class that day, and I said, I'm giving up grading. Now, my TA at the time, Steve Derby, who's had been a colleague for a long time, was kind of shocked by this, but he went along with it. He was willing to do it. But this was a big surprise, because here, we've always had grades, and we had these wonderful curves. If you do this on the midterm, this in the final is the grade you get. And I would say, hey, you want to do that? Fine, but I'm out of it. And that was the last time I ever graded a subject. Well, another thing happened. This was kind of a magical day, because I had an oral exam for a doctoral candidate that I'd seen the week before. And I had some doubts about it. It wasn't one of my students. I had some doubts. I was going to be in the examining committee. And he knew that I had these doubts, so he was pretty worried about this. So, but I realized now I'm not going to be a judge anymore. Right? So he came in looking to the exam. There were 4 other professors there, including the chair and his advisors and so forth. And at the beginning of the meeting, I said, by the way, I'm going to vote to pass you. And this is unheard of. I mean, you tell a student you're going to pass him, and he looks, you serious? And I said, absolutely. I'm stopping grading things. Well, they all look a little uncomfortable, but there's no law saying on the faculty that you have to listen to the person. Well, what happened was, it was so interesting because as soon as he lost his fear, and he could see I meant this, that he did very well. In other words, the question that had been bothering him, he resolved at that time, and we had a great exam, and there was no question that he deserved to pass, even in my old mode. And so at the end of the exam, he leaves the room, and then they pass little pieces of paper around. You're supposed to write pass or fail. I think that's still the system. And so I said, well, I'm going to pass. Why do I have to write this on a piece of paper? Oh, well, the rules are you got to write it on a piece of, this is a little piece of scrap paper. This is not something going into the archives. So that was kind of funny. They believed I would not say what I was really going to do. Anyway, he passed, and that was another. Well, so this became a miracle day now. This is the Thursday after the 3 days. And all kinds of strange things are happening. At that time, I was taking Russian from a woman in Menlo Park who had been a Russian emigre right after the revolution, spent her life, and French I was taking from her, because she'd gone to France, and I started out learning French from her. She spoke perfect French, and I said, okay, I'm going to learn some Russian too. So every Thursday night I'd go over to her house, and she would, would spend an hour talking, and I think at this point it was Russian. Now, this day of Thursday was such an exciting day, I had no chance to eat. Now, I've been going to this one probably 3 or 4 years, and that night when I arrived, and we've gone through this, but that night when I arrived, she said, I've made some pierogies, would you like? I mean, she had something cooked for me. I said, this is amazing. This is a miracle, never happened before. And there was no hint that she didn't say, I'll have to do that for you someday. No, we sat down, we talked Russian in her living room or someplace. But miracle of miracles, here she is, feeding me, which is just what I needed. And I had this notion right then that I was okay. In other words, I didn't have to worry about anything. Whatever I needed was going to be there for me. So that was Thursday, and I was getting pretty high and feeling very good. The next day was a day I planned to do consulting in this group at SRI. And so I went off that morning, and I was telling my wife about this, all these experiences, and I remember reflecting on some of the things that I was thinking. It was very strange. At one point, I actually cried because I felt sorry for Hitler. As I said, imagine that he chose to do these terrible things as a lesson to mankind of what they're capable of. So what he did was terrible, but suppose he had done this out of an intent to show people what they're capable of, and therefore get them not to do it again. So I said, I don't know if that's true, but it's possible. I don't know if I went to the decision analysis group, and we were talking about security clearances for this thing. Well, one of the things, I used to have a security clearance because I was doing work like this, and that was the last time I ever had a discussion of it. One of the things that you did with security clearance is you always kept your old forms, because if you'd said you'd been to Timbuktu in your old form and you didn't mention it the next time you filled it out, then they'd say, oh, you're trying to cover up that you didn't go to Timbuktu. Okay? So it was important to keep your old forms. And I remember when I heard this discussion, and I wasn't really into it, but it seemed to me that it was about what would happen to you when you died, whether you would keep your old form or not. And so I was interpreting everything that happened to me that day. And I noticed that this is when I rode a motorcycle, and everything seemed very real to me. Things I hadn't noticed before became vibrant and colorful. And it was like I was seeing things that I had not been open to seeing. And I mean just the beauty of life. And that was amazing. So, so that night I got home, and I'm, you know, still feeling very good. But then I began to realize that things were accelerating. That's everything was happening faster for me. So this would have been a Friday night, and you know, I was home with my wife and 4 children, and they knew something was going on with me. And so I began to. I had a little tool room, which it was like a large closet with tools all over it, and a little television set and so forth. And that's a place I really felt comfortable. I felt secure in that tool. And I'd sit there and I'd watch television. And I noticed that as I watched it, the rate of what was happening depended on how much I concentrated on television. If I kind of nodded off, it would slow down, and if I kept my intent, then it would speed up and be its normal rate. So it was as if I was, this is my perception at least, that I was somehow controlling what was happening out there. And I remember my family seeing this very strange now. And so they were, you know, what's going on with Dad? He's not himself. I mean, I could talk to them. As a matter of fact, what was interesting about this is if you had given me any technical problem, you know, differentiate, I was very clear on all of that. It wasn't like I was goofy or something. Any factual matter that I knew that I could, any procedure I could have carried out, I still could have. But it wasn't of concern to me anymore. And so I had this feeling that I was running the universe. And that's why I think when I lost my attention, things would slow down. And this time, this is very strange to them, but I'm not you know, doing anything strange. But there was, you know, this was the tool room, and so they were kind of keeping an eye on me, and they were in the family room and so forth, and it got to be pretty late at night, and so they decided they're going to sleep in the family room and so forth. But I'm wide awake, because I'm running the universe after all. It's serious business. And I remember once I had this new hammer I bought, which was I forget the exact kind, but it was a no-mar hammer. And it was very comforting for me just to hold this thing. And I go walking through the house, sometimes carrying it. And I think some of them were concerned, because you see, from outside it looked like maybe I'd be doing some bad thing with this hammer, but of course that was not my intent at all, but it might have appeared that way to them. And so this went on. This was Friday night, and this experience of running things and very what's the word? Very much accelerated. But I did get to sleep that night. But I had this question of what happens if I forget to run the universe. And by the way, I knew that I wasn't the only one who was going to do this. I knew other people had done it in the past. And my concern was if I fall asleep, what do how will I remember to when it's my turn again? And I thought a lot about that, and finally came up with a symbol that I said, well, if I wake up and I see the symbol, I'll know it's my turn again. And the symbol I chose was a circle. And every time I've told this story to somebody, there's been a circle around, lots of circles around usually, although they're very rare in nature, except for a drop in a pool or the sun or something like that. You'd be in a forest at night, you wouldn't see too many circles. Anyway, so, and I realized this, I think I mentioned before, that just whenever I'm telling someone, I see the circles in their eyes, so I was even assured that it would be my turn if I met another person. Okay, so that was Friday night, and I finally did get to sleep. And I'm trying to remember which day this was. Yeah, I think the Mathesons were having kind of a garage sale, and we went over there, and it was, you know, beautiful sunny day, and at one point I pricked my finger on a rose or something, you know, in the garden, and I had the realization that nothing that would happen to me would ever be any worse than this, which was essentially nothing. So I had nothing to fear at this point, and that was very clear. There's no reason to be fearful. And let's see, what else? Okay. And I think I bought something from some piece of crockery, and when we got home, I purposely let it break. I dropped it, which is very strange for me because I'm very careful about things usually. But it was important. It was symbolic for me to have destruction as well. That I can accept this too, instead of being attached to something. And that was the only time that happened. I'm trying to remember all the episodes, but I've probably forgotten some of them in order. I remember, I think it was Sunday morning, so I may be leaving out some things. Sunday morning, I had a very significant meeting with my daughter, Kim. And so, who was then, let's see, she would have been in her early, like 77, she was born in 58, so she was like 19, and you know, she's going to, all right? 56, no, to 21, she was just 21. And she was here at Stanford as a graduate student. And she came in and she, you know, hi Kim. And I said, Kim, I'm not going to marry you. And she, you know, what's this? I mean, what does this mean? And I said, I love you dearly, but I'm not going to marry you. And this was amazing, right? You know, what did I mean by that? And I said, no, I just want, oh yeah, I love you dearly, but I'm not going to marry your mother. You know, that's the way it is. So good luck. Well, it's kind of interesting. Within 2 weeks after that, she met the guy who is now her husband, and they got on famously, okay? And you know, and her husband Tim is like a son to me. I mean, he's a great guy. Turns out he and I had his doctoral advisor here at Stanford in electrical engineering was my office mate when I was a graduate student at MIT and so forth. So we have a lot of connections, you know, their son Andrew is now a graduate student electrical engineering doctoral program here at Stanford. So I had this notion that I could see at the time that somehow she wanted to not leave the family, you know, not make the father-daughter connection was very important to her, and I do love her dearly and still do, but it wasn't the right thing for her, and that's what I meant. I realized when I told her I wasn't going to marry, because of course I wasn't, and she knew that intellectually, but she hadn't internalized it somehow, and that freed her to go find a good husband, which she did. Fascinating. Anyway, so this week was, here I am crazy, I'm saying things like that, and you see, there's something that if somebody heard me say that who didn't understand, you say, that's crazy, why are you not going to marry his daughter? But that wasn't the point. It was what did it mean to her and what effect did it have on her life. So this was, I think we're now through Sunday morning, and at this point, there's a lot of other things I could talk about, but that's the main stuff. And Sunday morning, my wife is very concerned because, you know, I'm saying these things that are strange, and while I'm smiling and so forth, it's not the way I usually am. So she started to think about help. And one of the people she talked to was we had both done all kinds of things in the past. We'd done parent effectiveness training, all kinds of human kinds of stuff. In the past. And one of the things we did was go to a past lives person. She had gone first and I had gone, and I was told that I was the right-hand man of Genghis Khan, you know, which gave me a lot I had to worry about in terms of making up for the past. But when this happened, Polly, my wife, called her, and she said, you know about this kind of stuff, what do I do with him? And this person, really afraid, in spite of her great mastery of past life, she wanted no part of anybody who was in the state that I was in. So then Polly called the police, and they came over. And I'm sitting in the tool room watching television, of course, on Sunday morning, as I had been doing. And so I get this, the police officer, right? And really, if you see a police officer in this state, it's really an amazing sight, because they've got guns, this is not your friendly teddy bear. There's a guy with a badge and a gun and a big stick. Though they were Palo Alto police and very businesslike, but they're talking to me. I don't know what to make of it, right? But I'm pretty clear. I'm not beating up on people or threatening them or anything like that. So after a short discussion, they said, well, there's nothing we can do, right? I mean, he's not threatening anybody. He's not even doesn't have a gun or anything that might hurt people. So what are we supposed to do? So they left, and I think their advice was, call a hospital. Maybe they can help you. Well, Polly was getting upset because she was not getting any help from the people we knew, the police. So she called the hospital, and they said, well, if you can get him over here, we'll talk to him. But then she had to figure out how to get me over there. And so she said, well, maybe you should have an examination, see if you're okay. She talked me into it, and I was not really resisting, but okay, she wants me to go to the hospital, I will. And so she drove. We had this big Chrysler station wagon. Her and the 4 kids are in there. We go to the hospital. And so I'm talking to they have me interviewing what was a psychiatrist, right? And I told her the whole story, right? And she decided, oh, well, this guy's got to be, she didn't say anything. She said, well, just wait a minute. But what she had done, based on what I said, was commit me for 72 hours, which you could do in California, against my will. So this was an involuntary 72-hour commitment. I learned later. This really wasn't clear to me at the time. So at that, and I'm looking around the hospital, I say, hospitals are really not very pleasant places. They're all full of metal, chrome-plated metal. It's not a comfortable. You wouldn't want to be in a hospital. It's kind of sterile in its humanity. And I thought, it's really too bad that when you're sick, you have to go to a place that's so unpleasant for you to be in. I don't mean it smelled or anything like that. It just wasn't a place you'd want to spend time if you didn't have to. So anyway, at that point, they grabbed me and restrained me and put me on a stretcher and tied me down, carried me out to an ambulance, and off I went. And all this time I had been thinking that even going to the hospital, that this was some process of educating that I was going to get. This was like my postgraduate or something. Because look at the lessons I'd learned about grading, about, I have whatever I want in terms of food, the idiocy of the government things I was involved in, and I had nothing to fear. All those things I previously talked about. So I'm ready for the next lesson. So I'm going down south on the freeway in this ambulance lying there, and I'm thinking, well, finally I'm getting to the reception center where I'll get the next big learning. Okay, and I was pretty optimistic, and I remember running through everything in my life. They say when you die, your whole life runs before you. Well, I wasn't dying, but I was able to visualize my whole life in a very short time, and it was like a super fast movie. But what I noticed was that instead of being the super fast movie being proportional to the time each of these things took, it was proportional to how valuable it was to me. So it's kind of expanding the times I'd spent in beautiful places and so forth, and good. those were, everything that was less than that just didn't appear. It was kind of a wonderful movie of my life. So I'm enjoying this. Then I get up, then I should say, down to the Santa Clara Valley Medical Center, which was the official place where people like this got locked up, is really. And so they took me on the hospital, got me in, took me out of the ambulance. Here I am in a hospital bed, strapped down. And, you know, they say, take these pills, and I put pills in my mouth, I'm spitting them out. I'm ready for the lesson. I don't want to be strapped down in a hospital bed, right? So after I spat them out about 3 times, they injected me against my will. So, you know, I know what a woman must feel like when she's raped, because everything in your body is resisting what's going on. You feel so deeply violated. Well, if you're injected against your will with something you don't even know, that's rape. And that's what they did. Now, interestingly enough, what it was Thorazine, some great depressant. But what I found out the next day when I looked at the rules and regulations out in the main place was it's against the law to give a patient anything against his will, even in this lockup. And they denied they did it. Okay? So here's another example of the perfidy of the life we're living, where there can be a law, doctors can violate that law and lie about doing it, but that's no surprise when you look at the Nazi program for killing the Jews in hospitals, and not Jews, Germans in hospitals before they even started World War II. Anyway, so there I was, strapped out. Now I'm knocked out. Okay, so Sunday night, not there. I'm dead to the world. And I wake up the next morning, and they untie me, you know, because I'm back to life again, and I'm realizing this, especially after that experience, that this was not my next level of education. This is people who don't understand what I'm going through. And I had read One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which sort of restored my sanity at that point. So I was right back in where I should be when I woke up the next morning. But I could see everything very clearly. It was amazing. It was like transparent. And so I had my clothes were taken away. I had a hospital gown. And I said, okay, I want a shower, to the attendant. And he says, okay, you can have a shower. So I go down to the shower, he shows me where it is, and I'm going to take the shower. And as I'm getting into the shower, he hands me, a cup of shampoo. And he says, don't drink the shampoo. I said, well, I didn't drink the shampoo. He says, I don't know, but somebody drank it last week. Okay, so just tell me. So then I looked at the shampoo. The shampoo was red. Right. And I smell it, and it smells like cherries. And I said, now I understand why someone might drink it. The shampoo tastes like fruit. And then I had this realization that that's what we do with soap. Soap always doesn't smell like soap anymore. It smells like lime, it smells like lemon, it smells like cherries. And I said, what kind of a thing is it that we make everything smell like it's not what it's not? Why would you want something that you're going to use to clean your hair smell like a fruit? Fruit should smell like fruit, not soap should smell like fruit. And then I thought even further. I said, you know all that stuff under the sink that's poisonous, you got to keep out of the children, a lemon pledge or something like that. Why do we make it smell like fruit? I mean, small wonder that kids get in and drink this stuff if we're going to make it smell like something that they should like. Okay, so anyway, I had the shower, and that was the end of that. Then it was breakfast time, and breakfast, I met the other inmates in the breakfast room. Inmates is maybe about, they were prisoners, and they were the most amazing people. They were the most generous people I ever met in this breakfast room. You know, they'd say, you know, would you like something I'm not going to eat? Would you like that? Maybe you'd care for one. I've never seen such generosity. And these were people of every description, you know, males, females, all different ages, races, you know, just a potpourri of humanity, and all very, very pleasant. Okay? I remember there was this big black guy that I might have run from if I had been in a dark area of town, and I could see how beautiful he was. And I said, "Hi, I'm Ron," and you know, he told me. I mean, we were just one-on-one as people. That was amazing. However, the staff was a different story. They were very much not into we're all one humanity. They were all into, you know, you're the inmates, we're the staff. Finally, it came time early that morning to have your interview with the psychiatrist. And so I'm sitting down with him, and he says, you know, we had a brief conversation, what do I do, and all that kind of stuff. And then he said, oh, you teach at Stanford? I said, yeah. He said, in the entry economics. I said, that's right. I said, well, do you know so-and-so? And I said, yeah, he's one of my doctoral students. I mean, he just graduated, and he's off in New York now. He said, oh, he's one of my best friends. So we go on like that. And we're having this great conversation. And then he suddenly realizes that I'm an inmate and he's the doctor. In other words, we were having, just like we met in the bar and said, you know, a group, and we have a common, you know, friend, and he got out of role for a moment, which just shows how different things were on that Monday morning from the way they had been previously. So then we have a conversation. He says, well, you know, have you ever thought of killing yourself? And I said, well, no. I mean, that's not something I think a lot about. And he said, well, if you did, how would you kill yourself? I'd say, well, you know, I'd probably go off my motorcycle and just go into a bridge abutment at a very high speed. That would do it. And we had some other pleasantries and so forth. And then it became, was over. And later that afternoon, yeah, okay. Yeah, then I think I went to occupational therapy. In occupational therapy, I might have mentioned this another time, what they do is give people physical activities which get you to, I don't know, talk to each other and have something to do. And at this time, the activity was making Snoopy ornaments, Snoopy-like ornaments out of plastic foam, and you paint them, and they're going to be hung on the Christmas tree, because this was late November, and Christmas was coming, so the patients are making these things. And so, you know, we're sitting there, 6 of us around a table, and I get to know some of them. I said, you know, I'd ask them, why are you in here? And one of them said, well, you know, I crashed my car into a mail truck, and they think, you know, I'm trying to kill federal employees, and that's why I'm here. And I said to the guy beside me, I said, well, why are you in here? He said, well, you know, when it gets too bad, I just take a cigarette, and he motioned, grinding it into his hand. Okay, so that's what I do when I get. So these were people who were not usually doing things that are usual in your life. But there we were making these Snoopy things. Well, it's kind of interesting. I'll jump ahead. After I got out, you know, about 2 weeks later, I realized that a blanket that I had been wrapped in when I went there had not been returned to me. A very nice blanket. And so I called up and I said, you know, I wanted to make sure I had the right ward, or the right wing, and so I said, you know, the reception, I said, you know, I think I was there. She says, well, you know, I don't have those records. I said, well, do you do you see the Christmas tree? She says, yeah. I said, does it have Snoopy ornaments on it, right? She says, yes. Well, that's my ward. She said, oh, I never saw those Snoopy ornaments before. In other words, it's, again, this thing of people not seeing what's in their lives, even though they're right there and have been there. Okay, so that afternoon, Polly came, my wife Polly came to visit me, and she looked pretty worried after all her husband's in a loony bin and locked up. But I'm okay, right? And she says, at the beginning she said, oh, they tell me that you've been thinking of killing yourself. And I said, okay, Polly, have you ever thought of killing yourself? She says, well, no, but I said, well, how would you do it if you're going to do it? She said, well, I'd probably get in a car and run into a bridge. And it's interesting, about a couple of years later, I heard that, I think it was Sammy Davis Jr. on late night television, was asked that question. He said the same thing. In other words, what I had said, which was not being told my wife, like, this guy's thinking of killing himself, was something many people have said, and they're not planning to kill themselves. So that was kind of interesting. And then I said, they injected me against my will last night. And she says, oh, they said they didn't do anything. So I pointed to my arm where there was this big hole where they put the injection in, and I said, they don't let us have any sharp things in here, so I couldn't have done this to myself. So there was the evidence that I'd been injected, and now she could see that what I was saying made a lot of sense. But I'm still locked up for 72 hours. There's nothing she can do about it. So that night, I'm not tied down the room anymore. I can I'm a regular bed, and the door isn't locked. So that night I had trouble sleeping, and I got up and I walked out of my room and sat down in the area where visitors would sit. It's just sort of around the corner. It wasn't more than 50 feet or so. And there was a woman behind this counter, desk that was this kind of reception for the area. That's the one that's the station I called about the blanket. And so after I sat there for about 5, she says, you can't sit there. And I said, well, why not? She said, I don't know, is there some rule? Wait a second, I can't get to sleep. It's just nice to have a change. Sorry, you have to go back and lie down in your bed, even though you can't sleep. Now think about that, right? How many people, when they can't sleep, get up and they go sit someplace? But you see, it's crazy to do that. It's not forbidden. It's forbidden behavior in a place like a mental hospital. Just think about that. Okay, that's the night that I mentioned when we talked before about the tobacco thing. About
tobacco?
Oh yeah. In other words, that night, this would have been Monday night, I suppose. Yeah, Monday night, probably before I had the trouble sleeping. I was in the day room, which is like a big lounge area, and it was empty. And at that time, the state of California thought it was okay to smoke, and what they would do was provide bulk tobacco, like pound tins of tobacco, and cigarette papers, and a little machine to make cigarettes. And so that it was, quote, free. So I was sitting there in this room, quite a large room, but by myself. And this other fellow comes in and comes over to, it was like a sofa and a coffee table with the cigarette making. And he said, oh, look what somebody's made for me. And he reaches down to pick up the cigarettes. It was already made. And then he stopped and he said, no, maybe this person's coming back. I better make my own. So he moved it aside and made a cigarette for himself. Now notice, this is who would care? But he cared. He was sensitive enough not to take a cigarette that somebody else might have made for themselves. And later I asked him, well, why are you here? And he said, oh, I stabbed my daughter again. Now think about that. Here's a person who's sensitive enough not to take a free cigarette that somebody made for himself, but stabbed his daughter again. So this was a place that had people who were dealing with things in life. Okay, so let's see, I mentioned that night. Okay, so I'd been there Sunday night and Monday night. And then on Tuesday morning, they said, well, you know, you were, so I was then just like 48 hours from their point of view. We're going to transfer you to the Belmont Hill Psychiatric Center, which is, you know, not a lot. It's sort of the next step up now that I was behaving myself. And so I was taken in a van from down south near San Jose to Belmont Hills. Arrived at Belmont Hills, and it's very attractive. It's like the Stanford campus, you know, very nice architecture and so forth. And you know, it really looks like a country club. So I'm being checked in there, and the first thing they asked me is about 10 minutes worth of numbers in my life. So here I'm supposed to be a crazy person locked up, but I have to know my social security, know my home phone, you know, all the numbers in my life I have to know, which happily I did. But I said, this is kind of crazy, you know, taking this person is supposed to be mentally unbalanced, and you're asking him all these numbers. Anyway, I get in there, and they had activities. So one activity, oh yeah, this is good stuff. One activity was a lecture. So you go to the lecture, and at that time there was a book called I'm Okay, You're Okay, and it's about, you know, human relationships. So the guy's giving the lecture, and there's maybe 10 of us in the room. And as he's giving this lecture, he's obviously not too happy to be doing this. I mean, a little worried himself. I mean, who wants to lecture to crazy people, right? But what he's talking about is about how it's important to make contact, and he's modeling exactly the opposite. So it's like they got someone who hated this book giving the lecture on it, although the message in the book was just fine. Then came my favorite time at the Belmont Hills Psychiatric Center, which was occupational therapy, and this was a step up, because what in this case you could do different things, and they had leather, make things with leather craft, right? And they had what I chose was to make a little purse out of leather, and so the pieces were cut, but I had to do any decoration I want on it by stamping it, and then the sewing of it, and so forth. So I decided I would do this, and I put the stamp I was going to make was a frog stamp, you know, after the cover of a book that I'd written, and I was going to make a very nice purse for myself, which I did. But there was a problem, because this is a three-dimensional thing, and when you're sewing it, it's not clear how it's going to fit when you put it all together. And the guy who was teaching this was kind of, how could I put it? He condescending, I guess is the word, to the people, like, you know, he's the one who knows how to do everything, right? So I said, okay, how am I going to do this? I want to line it up. Well, turns out they had little safety pins, none that you could do any damage with. So I said, okay, I'm going to pin all the pieces so that I'll have it all perfectly in line. Then when I start sewing, I know I'll come out right. And so he comes over, and he says, "Oh, isn't that nice? You know, you figured out how to do that, right?" Well, then I was reminded of a joke that I heard a long time ago. It's about a guy who's driving along on the road, and he has a flat tire. And so he pulls over to the side, and it turns out he's right in front of this mental hospital, which has a fence around it. And as he gets out of the car, he notices this guy hanging onto the bars in the fence looking at him and so forth. And he feels a little uncomfortable, but you know, the guy can't get out. So he's hurrying to do this, and he jacks up the car, and he takes off the hubcap and gets his wrench, takes off the hub nuts and puts them all in the hubcap, and then takes the wheel off. But he's hurrying now, and as he's doing this, he steps on the hubcap, and all the bolts go down into a sewer. He can't get them. Oh shit! Now what's he gonna do? He's got the spare tire, he's got the jack, he's got everything, and the wrench, but no lug. The guy looking through the fence says, "Psst, hey buddy, yeah, what do you want?" A little concerned. He said, "Look, all you got to do is take one nut off each of the other wheels and use it to put this wheel on." And the guy says, "You know, that's great. I can do that. That'll be fine. You know, what are you doing in there?" The inmate says, "I may be crazy, but I'm not stupid." So anyway, this guy comes over and says, and the occupant says, "Oh, it's really clever. Use a little pin." I said, "Hey, I may be crazy, but I'm not stupid." Been waiting to use that line all my life. Finally got a chance to use it. So then we had what would you call it? If there had been liquor, it would have been a social meeting. You know, the tea and all this, and you get to meet all the other people. Well, there may be 20 people there. Well, what I can see is that these people are playing at being crazy. In other words, they're saying, you know, "Are you on lithium?" They're sort of enjoying the process of being. Of course, they don't think they're crazy; they're just getting a little mental treatment. But the contrast between them and the people that I met in the Santa Clara Valley, these people, in fact, most of them really needed some kind of help. These were kind of playing at it. And I remember this guy's talking to me, and I said, "Oh, what do you do?" He said, "Well, he works at Stanford. He's in the administration someplace." And so I said, "Oh yeah, well I teach there." Now he doesn't want to talk anymore. now he's a little concerned that somehow it might get back that he's in the booby hatch. Anyway, I found this a kind of a charade of these people who had probably some mental issues, but they were enjoying the process. And of course, I was not. I wanted to get out of there. So the next morning, now I've been there about 72 hours, and I say, "Okay, I want to go home." Tell the nurse, and the nurse says, "Oh, you do? Well, you'll have to talk to the doctor." So they make me wait another couple hours, and then I talk to the doctor for the interview, and he says, "Okay, you want to go home?" He says, "We don't advise that." I say, "No surprise, you're making money by my being here, right?" He said, "Well, why do you really want to go home?" And I said, "Well, why do you want to go home at night? Do you enjoy it here all day? Or why don't you just stay here instead of go home to your family?" Right? He got the message. But okay, you can go home. But it was kind of interesting because you could see right away that they were going to make more money if I just, maybe I do need another couple of weeks. After those people in the lounge were so nice and I'm enjoying it. I could get my lithium too. I wanted out of there, and so they had to let me go. So then I called my wife, and she came with the kids, and she's looking a little, how's he going to be? But since she visited me, she knew I wasn't going to be too bad. And then my life began again, my usual life. And the first thing I had to do was figure out why this happened to me, because I can't be the only one who went through this. And by the way, while I was there, they kept thinking I'd had some drug overdose. Maybe this was something I'd taken. Well, they gave me all kind of blood tests and all this, and as I knew, they wouldn't find anything that I'd ingested that had caused this whole episode. Anyway, so now I've made it my task the next month or so to understand what had happened to me. And I read all kinds of books, and I really just loaded up on them and took off. Instead of the Christmas break, doing something else, that was my goal. And one of the things that I wanted to look into, first I read stories about people waking up in other places like India, where they had, that's the way I consider waking up, that they'd say this guy might be a shoemaker at a village, and all of a sudden he he sees himself a different way, and this was not unexpected. They put him in a safe place and take care of him, and after a few days he'd come back a different person and continue his life as a shoemaker. In other words, you didn't have to go wandering off in the countryside when you had one of these experiences, but it was seen as a positive thing. Speaking of a positive thing, at this time, my wife was still saying, why couldn't I get help for this? I mean, after all, this must happen to other people. So she found out about something called the mental health hotline that you could call and get help. But here's the irony of it. It's only open from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. You have to go crazy during regular business hours. I mean, of course, right? Why are you going to provide services outside? Think about what's really crazy. Having a mental health hotline that only works during regular business. Does that make sense? Apparently it made sense to somebody. I don't know what the story is today, but it wouldn't surprise me if there's a similar limit. It's like getting, service on your computer when you call up and they say, well, at a certain time we can do that. Anyway, so I read these books, and the one that made the most impression on me was one called at that time was called The Religions of Man, and since, to be politically correct, then it's been changed to The World's Religions. Same book, but it's kind of interesting to look at the rewriting of history. Written by Houston Smith, who's written extensively on these things, and I'll come back to him in a moment. But what this book did, and I think it's still available, had all the major religions of the world, not all, but many of them, maybe 8 to 10. And when you read each chapter, you thought, this is a great religion. In other words, each one was presented in the most positive way, which I thought was important. This wasn't mine's better than yours. So I'm going through this, and I had two criteria. One was that first of all, there had to be humor in the religion. If there's no humor, forget it. Because I knew that was part of my experience, including, the lunatic giving advice on the car. So I went through Christianity, great religion, no humor. Judaism, no humor. I don't mean no humor in Jews, but lots of humor in Jews, but the Old Testament, I couldn't find a single joke. And I couldn't find a single joke in the New Testament. If anybody can find one for me, I'd like to see it, but there was nothing to laugh about in either of those, what was taking the Old and New Testament together, the Bible. And then I got into Islam, and that was very attractive too, presented very well, and there was a subgroup called the Sufis that had humor in it, so that's a possibility, that might work. But the other criterion was it had to be possible to wake up in this religion. In other words, to have the experience that I had. And I was having trouble in all of these and seeing that. Except maybe for the founder of the religion. He woke up in my terms, but not ordinary people. And I didn't consider myself as someone who's about ready to found a religion, the Son of God or getting inspiration directly from God. So as I read on, I finally got to the chapter on Buddhism. And the subtitle of that was The Man Who Woke Up. I said, now I'm onto something. And as I read through this, I saw, it's not really a religion in a sense. It's a belief system. It's more of a philosophy. You didn't have to worship anybody. And it had humor. There were lots of examples of humor. And I said, this could be the one that is the best fit for me. And interesting, an interview I had the other day with that friend of yours on Charity Focus, the journalist. He said that was his criterion too. So humor is such a part of the human experience. I mean, we can even begin to see it in some of the other life forms in our world. So how could you possibly have the explanation for your existence and the meaning of your existence without humor in it? So that was very helpful to me. And then I began to think about all the changes in my life that I would make as the result of this. Of course, the no grading system had already been instituted. But then I got interested in spreading the word on the kind of experience that I'd had in terms of the government and the coercion and the minimum wage and so forth. So we started a course on that called Voluntary Social Systems, and then because of the ethical implications, this other course on essentially the ethical analyst. So before that, I'd done only my professional teaching and decision analysis, and that was going very well. But now this was an opportunity to extend it, because I became concerned about people using what they had learned, which was powerful, in ways that might not be appropriate, and I wanted them to have this, to realize what they're getting into. I remember one example. People, I'd say, well, okay, how do you decide, where you're going to put the road through? And if you're a civil engineer, you have this question of, okay, where do you want to go from here to there? And you have this cut and fill process, and you're trying to minimize the amount of material you have to move. You're filling valleys, cutting passes, and so forth. And you can have giant computer programs and optimizations. And you say, okay, this is the best route for the road, and we did an excellent professional job. And so now you're out there, maybe the road's about ready to be built, and you see that there's a woman, an elderly woman on the porch of a house, and there are police around, sheriff and so forth, cars, and you stop and say, well, what's going on? And she's crying. She says, don't take my home. I've lived here my whole life. I just want to live here until I die. And the officials are saying, yeah, but your house has been condemned by eminent domain. The people in Stanford have figured out this is the best route for the road, and the government's taking it. We're going to give you some money for it. She said, I don't want the money. Just leave me alone. Well, how do you feel if you were the one who planned the road to go through there? Do you know the system into which your work is being incorporated and the consequences of that? So that was the kind of message we wanted to get out. So there are probably many other things we could talk about, but those are the main ones.
Great.